have paid a dividend every year since 1868. If you are shopping for life insurance, you are going to hear that sentence across a kitchen table or 40 seconds into a clip you never went looking for. It arrives like a door closing, and it is meant to end the conversation. So here is the first surprise. It is true. 158 consecutive years, confirmed in the company's own announcement this year, and nothing that follows takes a word of that away. Here is the second. Across the last 38 years, the number underneath that sentence was cut in half. The sentence never changed. And here is the third, which is the one that costs money. That number is climbing again right now, and that makes the sentence weaker evidence, not stronger. Because 1868 answers a question you were not asking. Because there are two questions hiding inside that sentence, and they are not the same question. The first one is, did they pay? The second one is, how much did they pay? The sentence answers the first one with a record that almost nothing in American finance can match. It does not answer the second one at all. Not partially, not approximately. It contains no information about the second question whatsoever. And the second question is the one with dollars in it. There is a version of this you already understand instinctively in every other part of your life. A restaurant that has been open every day since 1968 has told you something real about the restaurant. It has told you nothing about tonight's menu, or the price of the steak, or whether the kitchen is as good as it was. Open every day is a fact about survival. It is not a fact about dinner. Nobody confuses those two, because nobody is trying to sell you a 40-year commitment based on the door being unlocked. Move the same structure into a financial product, and the confusion happens instantly. Partly because the number is so old that it feels like it must be carrying more information than it is. And partly because a continuity fact quietly borrows the authority of the entire institution behind it. When someone says 1868, your mind does not hear a narrow claim about payment frequency. It hears solidity, permanence. The Depression survived. The wars survived. All of that is real. None of it is an answer about magnitude. That gap is what this is about. Not whether the company is honest, because on this specific point it demonstrably is. Not whether the product is good or bad, because that is a different conversation with different numbers. Just this. What does the streak measure? What does it leave out? And what does the part it leaves out actually look like when someone writes it down year by year and adds it up? By the end of this, you will have seen 38 straight years of the number the sentence never mentions. You will have seen what happens to a projection when the one number it holds still turns out to move. And you will have 3 questions to ask the next time somebody says the year 1868 to you like it settles something. Start with what a dividend is here, because the word is doing something different than it does anywhere else you have heard it. When a public company pays a dividend, it is distributing profit to shareholders who bought stock. That is not what is happening in this case. A company like Guardian is a mutual company. There are no shareholders. The policy holders are the ones with the ownership interest. So when the company charges more in premium than it ends up needing, when people live longer than the pricing assumed, when the investment portfolio earns more than the contract guaranteed, when expenses come in lower than budgeted, that surplus does not go to Wall Street. A portion of it gets returned to the policyholders who paid it in. The industry calls that a dividend. It is closer in spirit to a refund of an overcharge than to a payout of profit. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it does, and here is why. A refund of an overcharge does not have to be the same size 2 years in a row. It depends entirely on how big the overcharge was. And how big the overcharge was depends on things nobody at the company controls, like what bonds were paying when the money was invested, which brings up the number the whole thing runs on. It is called the dividend interest rate, and an agent will say it casually, the way anyone says a mortgage rate. The dividend interest rate is the rate the insurer applies to the portion of your contract that participates in the surplus. Every year, the board of directors declares one. Every year, it goes into a press release. And every year, it goes into the illustration that gets printed and slid across the table toward you. It is worth knowing that the interest rate is not the only ingredient in a dividend, because that fact gets used in both directions. A dividend also reflects mortality experience, meaning whether policyholders live longer than the pricing assumed, and expense experience, meaning whether the company ran leaner than budgeted. Both of those move the final number too. Someone defending the product will point this out to explain why a falling scale does not translate one-for-one into a falling dividend, and that is a fair correction. But it cuts the other way just as hard. If the declared scale is only one of 3 inputs, then the scale is not the whole story about how much you get, which means the streak is even further from being the whole story. 2 of the 3 ingredients are invisible to you entirely. The third one, the interest rate, is the only one published every year with a number attached. It is the only one anybody can check. So it is the one to check. That illustration is the reason any of this matters. Because an illustration is a projection, and a projection has to assume something about the future. What it assumes about the dividend is the simplest possible thing. It takes this year's declared scale and holds it perfectly still for the next 40 years. Not because anyone is lying, because there is genuinely no honest alternative. Nobody knows what interest rates do in 22 years. So the illustration freezes today's number and runs it forward. And there is a disclosure printed somewhere on that page saying dividends are not guaranteed. You read that disclosure. Everyone reads that disclosure. And almost nobody has any idea what it costs because nobody has ever shown you the size of the thing it is disclosing. So here is the whole experiment, stated up front, before a single dollar sign appears. One thing has to be said plainly before a dollar sign goes anywhere near this. The dividend interest rate is not the return on a policy, and it is not a rate credited to your cash value. It is one input applied to one portion of the contract. What follows takes that single number, holds it still the way an illustration holds it still, and then lets it move the way it actually moved. That is the whole experiment. It is not a policy value, and it is not what anyone earned. Say that twice because it is the difference between understanding this and misunderstanding it badly. One number, held still, then allowed to move. Everything else in the comparison is identical. Now the number. The declared dividend scales going back to the late 1980s are not something the carriers put on their websites. They exist in an industry compilation of declared dividend scales, a document circulated to agents, listing 12 carriers year by year. And the more recent years show up in the trade publications that track this stuff annually, the Insurance Pro blog among them. Where those sources overlap, they agree exactly. For 2015 and 2016, the independent compilations report the same figure for Guardian, to the 100th%. So the series stitches together cleanly. Here it is. In 1989, the declared scale was 11.5%. Sit with that for a second. 11.5. That was not an outlier either. Across the 12 carriers in that compilation, the 1989 numbers run from about 9.5 to 11.5. Mass Mutual was at 11.15. New York Life, 10.25. Northwestern Mutual, 10 flat. The double-digit era was the whole industry, not one company having a good year. And every one of those companies had a version of the sentence. They had all been paying without interruption for decades. The streaks were real then too. 1990, 11%, 91, 10.5, 92, 10.25, 93, 9.75, 94, 9 flat, 95, 8.5, 96, 8. That is 1989 to 1996. 7 years. The declared scale went from 11.5 to 8. It lost 3.5 points, almost a third of itself, in the time it takes a kid to get from first grade to 8th. And during all 7 of those years, the sentence was true. Every year without exception, a dividend was paid. The streak never wobbled. If someone had said it to you in 1996, they would have been telling you the truth, exactly the same way they are telling you the truth today. Then something interesting happens, and it is worth noticing because it complicates any easy story about decline. The scale went back up. 97, 8.5, 98, 875, 99, 875 again, 2000, 8.5, 2001, 8.5. 5 years of stability and modest recovery. If you had bought in 1996 and watched the number for the next 5 years, you would have concluded the slide was over and the thing had found its level. It had not. 2002, 8 flat, 2003, 7, 2004, 6.6, 3 years. From 8.5 down to 6.6. That is the sharpest stretch in the entire series, and it maps onto exactly what you would expect if you know what happened to bond yields in that period. A mutual insurer's dividend is driven overwhelmingly by what its portfolio earns, and that portfolio is mostly bonds bought over decades. When new money gets invested at lower yields than the money it is replacing, the average drifts down, slowly because the portfolio is enormous and long-dated, but relentlessly. That is the mechanism nobody explains at the kitchen table. The dividend scale is not a decision about generosity. It is largely an echo of the bond market from 5, 10, 20 years earlier, working its way through a portfolio the size of a small country's economy. The middle of the 2000s brought a partial bounce again. 2005, 675, 2006, 6.5, 2007, 675, 2008, 7.25, 2009, 7.3. Look at that. 2008 and 2009, the two worst years for American household finances in 80 years, and the declared scale went up, which is a genuinely useful thing to understand about how this product behaves, and it is the strongest, honest argument that people who sell it have. The portfolio was still earning on bonds bought years earlier. The scale did not care what the stock market did that week. If the story were simply, the number always falls, those 2 years would break it. The story is not that. The story is that the number moves and the sentence does not. Then the long grind down. 2010, 7, 2011, 685, 2012, 695, 2013, 665, 2014, 625, 2015, 605, 2016, 605, 2017, 585, 2018, 585, 2019, 585, and then the floor. 2020, 5.65, 2021, 5.65, 2022, 5.65, 11.5 down to 5.65. That is the full arc of the number from 1989 to 2022. It lost 50.9% of itself. It was cut in half. Across 34 years in which the sentence never changed by a single word. Before going further, there is a free resource that goes with this one. It is a short checklist of the questions that make an insurance illustration tell you what it is actually assuming, including the 2 that most people never think to ask. The link is in the pinned comment. Now, the part that keeps this honest, because there is a version of this that would be unfair to the company and it needs to be ruled out. Guardian is not an outlier. This is not a story about one carrier having a rough 3 decades while everyone else did fine. Look at what the other mutuals announced for 2026. New York Life is paying an estimated $2.78 billion to eligible policyholders. Largest payout in the company's 180-year history, their 172nd consecutive annual dividend. They have paid every year since 1854. Their declared scale for 2026 is 6.40%. Mass Mutual is paying an estimated $2.9 billion, their largest ever. Their 158th consecutive year, their declared scale is 6.60%. And Guardian is paying $1.7 billion, a record for them, up 9% over the prior year, growing at a compound rate of about 10% a year since 2020. Their scale for 2026 is 6.25%, 158 consecutive years. 3 companies, 3 unbroken streaks going back to before the telephone, 3 record dollar amounts, and 3 different numbers underneath. One thing has to be flagged here, and the trade press is blunt about it. Those 3 scales cannot be ranked against each other. 6.6 is not better than 6.25 because the carriers calculate the figure differently, apply it to differently defined portions of the contract, and use different accounting conventions underneath. Comparing one company's dividend interest rate to another's produces a number that feels meaningful and is not. The only comparison that carries information is a single company against its own history, which is exactly the comparison the sentence prevents you from making, because the sentence is about the streak, and every one of these companies has one. So take the single company against its own history and put a dollar sign on it. Here is the setup: $100,000, 30 years from 1989 through 2018. And exactly one variable changes between the two scenarios. Scenario 1 is what the illustration does. Take the scale as it stood in 1989, 11.5%, and hold it perfectly still for 30 years. That is not a straw man. That is the standard, disclosed, industry normal way a projection is built. Scenario 2 is what actually happened. Same 100,000, same 30 years. But instead of freezing the number, walk it through the scale the company actually declared, 1 year at a time. 11.5, 11, 10.5. All the way down through the slide, the bounce, the grind, exactly as it happened. Scenario 1, the frozen projection, ends at $2,619,667. Scenario 2, the real declared scale, ends at $959,070. The gap is $1,660,597. The real one delivers 36.6% of the projection and about 37 cents on the projected dollar. And say the part that makes it fair: nothing went wrong. Nobody defaulted. Nobody was defrauded. The company paid a dividend in every single one of those 30 years and set records doing it. The streak in the sentence held perfectly, start to finish. The gap is not the distance between a promise and a betrayal. It is the distance between a number held still and the same number allowed to move. There is a cleaner way to say the same thing without the compounding if the big figures feel abstract. Over those 30 years, the scale that was actually declared averaged 7.83% compounded. The number printed on the 1989 page was 11.5. That is the entire finding. 3 2/3 percentage points every year for 3 decades. Run it across the full available series instead. All 38 years from 1989 through 2026. And the frozen version reaches $6,258,000, while the real one reaches $1,511,000. 24%. The longer the projection runs, the wider the gap gets, because that is what compounding a difference does. A projection is least reliable exactly where people rely on it most, which is at the far end in the years they are actually planning for. Now the turn, because if the story stopped there, it would be a story about decline, and that is not what the data says. The number is going up. 2022 was the floor at 5.65, 2023, 575, 2024, 590, 2025, 6.10, 2026, 6.25, 4 consecutive years of increases. And the same thing is happening across the industry for the same mechanical reason, working in the opposite direction. Higher bond yields are finally being bought into long-duration portfolios, and the average is drifting back up. Guardian's dividend allocation has been compounding at roughly 10% a year since 2020. The dollar amounts are records. Somebody buying today is buying into a rising scale, not a falling one. Which is what makes the actual point instead of undermining it. Because think about what that means for the sentence. In 1989, with the scale at 11.5 and climbing out of a decade of double digits, the sentence was true. In 2022, with the scale at half that at its lowest point in the entire recorded series, the sentence was equally true. And today, with the scale climbing again, the sentence is true in exactly the same way, with exactly the same wording, carrying exactly the same weight. A statement that stays identical while the thing underneath it gets cut in half and then partially recovers is not a measurement. It is a constant. It has no ability to tell those 3 situations apart, which means it has no ability to tell you anything about the one you are in. That is not an accusation. It is just what the sentence is. It measures frequency perfectly. It cannot measure magnitude at all. and it was never built to. So does any of this mean a participating whole life policy is a mistake? No. That is a different question with different numbers, and plenty of families hold these contracts for reasons that have very little to do with the dividend scale. The claim here is much narrower than that, and it is only about one sentence. It cannot carry the weight that keeps getting put on it. The problem is what happens when someone treats one as though it were the other. There is a name for what that looked like the last time it happened at scale, and it is worth knowing because it is the closest thing to a controlled experiment this industry has ever run on itself. In the late 1970s and through the 1980s, when the declared scales were in double digits, a particular kind of sale became extremely popular. It was called the vanishing premium. The pitch was straightforward, and it was built directly out of an illustration. You pay premiums for a while, and at some point the accumulated dividends grow large enough to carry the policy on their own. After that year, the premiums vanish. You never write another check. The illustration showed the year. It was right there in a column of figures. Year 8 or year 11 or year 13, depending on the design. Sometimes the agent circled it. The math on that page was not wrong. Given its assumption, it was arithmetically perfect. And the assumption was the same assumption every illustration makes, that the scale printed at the top would still be the scale 20 years later. Then the 1990s arrived and the scales came down. Not catastrophically, not all at once. 11.5 to 9 to 8, the same slide already walked through. And people who had not written a premium check in years started receiving premium notices in the mail. They had done nothing wrong. They had paid what they were told to pay for as long as they were told to pay it. The companies had done nothing they had disclosed away from. Dividends were paid every one of those years, and the streaks stayed unbroken through the entire episode. What followed was years of litigation. New York Life, Prudential, MetLife, among others, faced suits from policyholders alleging they had been misled about how those illustrations worked and what they represented. That history is well documented in the trade press and in the legal literature of the period. It is worth treating as context rather than as a statistic because the specifics vary case by case. But the shape of it is the whole lesson, and the shape of it is not complicated. The streak did not break, the projection did, and the streak, right through the middle of it, kept being cited as evidence of the projection's reliability. The sentence had no way to signal that anything had changed. That is not a flaw in how it was used. That is the sentence. And the reason to raise a 30-year-old episode instead of leaving it in the past is that the conditions that produced it are not exotic. All it took was a period of unusually high declared scales, illustrations built on the assumption those scales would hold, and a long enough time horizon for the assumption to matter. The industry's own legal commentators have flagged more than once that the pattern is capable of repeating whenever those three conditions line up again. Nothing structural prevents it. The disclosure that says dividends are not guaranteed was on those pages in the 80s too. It was accurate then. It was not sufficient then. It is accurate now. Which is the practical point, and it is not about anybody's character. A disclosure tells you a number might move. It does not tell you how far that number has historically moved, and a person cannot weigh a risk whose size they have never been shown. That is the entire gap this fills. Not new information about whether the scale can fall, information about how much, over how long, and what that turned out to be worth. So bring this to the table you are actually sitting at. Somewhere in the paperwork in front of you, or in the paperwork someone is going to show you next month, there is a column of projected values. It runs out 20, 30, 40 years. The bottom of it holds a number that is doing a lot of the persuading, whether or not anyone points at it. That column has today's declared scale frozen inside it, 6.25 or 6.4 or 6.6 depending on the carrier. Held perfectly still all the way to the end of the page. You now know something about how still that number tends to sit. You have watched 38 years of it. You know it fell by half and climbed back part of the way. You know it went up during the financial crisis and down during a decade of calm, which means your intuition about when it should move is probably backwards. And you know that at every single point along that path, the streak was intact and the sentence was available to be said. So there are 3 things worth asking, and none of them are hostile. Any competent agent can answer all 3, and a good one will respect being asked. The first one, show the same projection with the dividend scale 200 basis points lower. 2 full percentage points. That is not a doomsday scenario, and here is the proof from the series you just heard. This scale fell 190 basis points in the 3 years between 2001 and 2004. It moved that far, that fast in living memory, with no crisis attached. 200 is a normal amount of movement for this number to make. Every illustration system in the industry can run a reduced scale version. It is a standard feature. Ask to see the bottom of that column next to the bottom of the first one on the same page, and let the difference be visible instead of theoretical. The second one, which parts of this are guaranteed and which parts are the projection? There is a guaranteed column, and it is required to be there. It is usually the least discussed thing on the entire document. It shows what the contract obligates the company to do if the dividend goes to 0 and stays there, which nobody expects and which is precisely why it is the floor worth knowing. The gap between the guaranteed column and the projected column is the exact size of what is being assumed rather than promised. That gap is the number you are really being asked to trust. And the third one, what has this company's own declared scale done over the last 20 years? Not how it compares to another carrier, because that comparison does not mean what it appears to mean. Its own history against itself. Every carrier has that data. If the answer is a shrug, that is information too. None of those 3 questions require you to distrust anybody. They only require you to notice that a streak and a scale are 2 different measurements, and that only one of them is in the sentence. Because here is where this started. Someone across a table, or 40 seconds into a clip on your phone, saying a year out loud like it settles the matter. 1868, and it is still true. Every word of it. 158 consecutive years, through 2 world wars, through the Great Depression, through the 1970s, through 2008, through a pandemic. A company that has sent money back to the people who paid it in every single year without missing one since before the telephone existed. That is not marketing. That is a genuinely remarkable thing about an institution, and nothing here takes it away. It is just not the answer to the question you were asking. You were not asking whether they would pay. You were asking what it would be worth. Those are different questions, they have different answers, and only one of them has a number attached that changes. Now you know which one the sentence measures, and now you know how to ask for the other one. Ask it before you sign, not 30 years in, because the difference between a family that ends up protected and a family that ends up surprised is almost never the honesty of the person across the table. It is which question got asked.